Hello everyone, welcome to a new video. Today I'm going to be talking about classics and my journey with classics. So you may very well know that last year I took it upon myself to make an effort to read more classic literature, particularly Victorian English literature, and because it's the time period that I enjoy the most. So I wanted to make a video not only reflecting a little bit about my choices in books, but also to give you guys some tips as to how you can start your own journey in classics if you are a little bit intimidated by them. So first of all, I think that one of the best things, and maybe this is a very obvious thing, but do really gravitate towards classics that have themes and have plots that really stand out to you and that you really kind of, I don't know, you're interested in. I think that at first when I began to kind of look into the many classics that exist, I kind of felt that I needed to read them all, and I don't think that you need to do that. Classics are books. They're just like any other book. Read the back of the book and see if you really are interested in what the story is about. I know it's very obvious, but I wanted to put it out there because I think that there is this misconception that if you want to read classics, you kind of have to drag into or not have a good time while you're reading them. So yeah, just pick what you like. Second of all, I think that audiobooks are great, especially if you have a very hard time kind of following the language and the writing style of some of these classics. So for me, one of the things that I noticed was that many classics have very, very long sentences, and you can kind of get lost into what these sentences is actually trying to tell you. So audiobooks really help with that because the narrator takes the time and they do the intonation and they give you, I don't know, just it helps you keep in mind what's going on throughout the story. And sorry that my dog is barking. So I will mention some of the audiobooks that I've really enjoyed throughout the last year. And I think that Dan Stevens narrating Frankenstein was a great one. And Rob Inglis narrating The Hobbit. I consider The Hobbit sort of a fantasy classic. And yeah, many more. I think that I will link below, or if you guys want me to do a video about all of the best narrators for classics, just let me know and I will make that video for you guys. Now that I have mentioned some of my tips, I think that I want to just show you guys all of the classics that I read, which are not many because I wanted to make the effort to read one classic a month, and I started that journey mid-year. So we have about 6-7-ish books, and I'm gonna share them with you guys so that you can know my thoughts, what they are about, if you're interested in some of them. And yeah, let's get started. I think that one of the most known authors out there when it comes to classic and Victorian literature is Jane Austen. And I think that she was the one who jump-started my love for classics. I read Pride and Prejudice in 2017, and it's one of my favorite books of all time. So I wanted to read a lot more from her. She has about 6 novels, I believe, and I read 4 of them in 2019. I'm kind of confused still with the years. But yeah, like I said, I will mention each and one of these and what they are about. So Persuasion is a very small novel, but it follows Anne Elliot, and we just follow her 7 years after she basically turned down the love of her life because he wasn't as wealthy and as, I don't know, as her family wanted him to be. So she turned him down, and she for the longest time regretted it, and we follow them meeting again 7 years later. I think that one of the things that I enjoyed most about this book is that it talks a lot about, well, all of Jane Austen's novels talk really about that subject, but just marriage and economic life for women. So we really get to see how for women at that time it was important to make these decisions and not maybe follow their hearts, because it did really establish how they were gonna live for the rest of their life. So we see someone who made the decision, the sort of correct decision, to leave this man behind because he wasn't wealthy. But we also get to see the repercussions of that decision, not only in Anne's life, but in Captain Wentworth, who was the man that she left years ago. So I really enjoyed this book. Not one of my favorite Jane Austen novels. I do love them all, but I think that this isn't my top favorite, but a really good one nonetheless. Then we have Sense and Sensibility. This one just follows two sisters and just basically their romantic lives, and you will see that many of Jane Austen novels have that. They have that sort of common thread of love and romance, which is what I love in books. So we have Eleanor, who is a very sort of sense-driven person. She's very centered and she's really objective about everything and wise about everything. And then we have Marianne, who is sort of the opposite. She's very extroverted, she's very sensible, and she's very, I don't know, emotional, you can say. So we get to follow these two young women as they kind of navigate their romantic lives under all of these circumstances. The beginning of the book is basically the death of their father and the implications that that has on them as women, because they cannot inherit the estate. So yeah, again, like all Jane Austen novels, it really goes into economic, marriage, all of this sort of society-driven plots. Then we have Mansfield Park, which is not my favorite. I didn't enjoy it at all. I think I found the main character of the story to be very boring. She's Fanny Price, and I think that many people think that way. However, I have seen that people that read it more than once, each time they see something different in it and they like Fanny Price more. So like I said, this novel follows our main character, Fanny Price. She was born into a very poor family, but they have a lot of siblings. So a sort of distant, this is what I remember, I forgot about this book, but a very distant relative, I think her uncle or her aunt, one of the two, decides to take her in and raise her in the midst of all of this wealth. So we have a character who was taken into the family, but she doesn't really belong there, and she's kind of an outsider, and she sees how her cousins kind of deal with the things that are occurring in their romantic lives, and yeah, and not just their romantic lives, but eventually her own. So like I said, I think that the main thing that I didn't enjoy about this book is Fanny. I found her to be a very passive character, but I do know that there are some people who really do enjoy this book, so don't take my opinion for it. And just give it a try and let me know what you think. Then we have Northanger Abbey, which is one of my favorites. So in this book we follow Catherine Morland. She visits Bath with some of the family's close friends, and we basically just follow her as she makes other friends. This is the first time that she's out into society so far. I believe she's 18, 19, and she has not been outside of her close town before, so it's just her kind of figuring out not only the town and society itself, but also sort of figuring people out and knowing that not everyone may have the best intentions at heart. So we have a character that's very naive, but it's a very funny way to see how she navigates all of this and she figures everything out. This also has a very gothic elements, which is one of the things that I really like. I have found that I really do enjoy gothic literature, and that gothic element is more present in the fact that Catherine Morland really likes novels and she likes mystery novels. So we get to see in the writing and in the narrative and the writing style how Jane Austen incorporates these gothic elements, these dark, mysterious sort of elements, not only in the novels that Catherine Morland reads, but the way that Catherine sees the world and how she basically sees mysteries and sees crimes where there are no crimes at all. So it's very interesting and it's one of my favorites, and the adaptation is also one of my favorites as well. Then we go to the Bronte Sisters. I read Jane Eyre, which was one of my favorite books of all time, and then I read Wuthering Heights, which I'm still trying to figure out my thoughts on it. I have not read Anne Bronte yet. I'm gonna start that this month. But yeah, Jane Eyre is one of my favorite books ever. I have 2 videos of it and I have talked about it so many times on my channel. But yeah, it's a book about Jane Eyre herself, and we basically get to follow her life as she grows up. Well, she spends part of her childhood with her aunt. Her aunt does not like her very much because she's poor and she doesn't kind of, I don't know, she's poor basically. And because of this, her aunt sends her to a school that it's also not the best. It's very religious and it's a very cold and dreary place. So we get to see Jane Eyre grow up in both of those places, and how eventually she decides to find a situation of her own and advertise to become a governess, to eventually go to Thornfield Hall, where she becomes the governess of the ward of one named Mr. Rochester. So this book is just so good. It has the romance element to it, the mystery gothic elements to it, and I just love it so much. I'm not going to talk very much about it because, like I said, I have done countless videos about this book. So go check this out if you want to know my thoughts more in depth about this book. But yeah, highlight of my year. So great book. I also have Wuthering Heights, which I have a very hard time explaining the plot because it's so intricate and so complicated and so just I don't know, dense, but objectively it's a great book. I think that what I found that was hard for me was the characters and how I didn't really like them, and I didn't like the things that they did, but I don't think that Emily Bronte wanted to write likable characters at all. So it's very interesting, and I like to think about this book a lot because it's just such an interesting story. I'm just gonna say that it's a family drama. We get to follow these 3 families and how they are just involved with one another, and yeah, it is great. It's just that I thought that I would be fangirling and enjoying this book so much, but again, I don't think that this is meant to be a pleasant read. And like I said, this also has a lot of very gothic elements as well, so it's very obscure, very, very creepy at times, and you get to see how the outside and the writing style and the descriptions of the setting really reflects how each of the characters is and feels. So I think that this is a masterpiece. I just don't think that I enjoyed it as much as other people do. It's not my favorite Bronte novel. I still like Jane Eyre more, but yeah, really good book nonetheless. And finally, like I said, I read The Hobbit, which I know that many may not consider a classic, but I do. I think that this is one of the, in terms of the fantasy genre, this is a classic and everyone must read it. So I have not read The Lord of the Rings. I have not seen the movies on purpose because I really want to read the books first, and I just read The Hobbit. I think I read it on December, and I love this book so much. It was so great. It follows a hobbit named Bilbo Baggins, and he lives a very comfortable life. He doesn't want to leave or do anything outside of it. But a wizard named Gandalf comes one day into his home and invites him to an adventure with, I believe, 12 dwarves that are trying to reclaim their kingdom after a dragon named Smaug kind of took it away from them. So it's a huge adventure, and I loved it so much. And the audiobook, it's just amazing. I heard that it's on script, so if you want to just read them all, I think they're there. I haven't checked. But yeah, Rob Inglis is the narrator of the audiobook, and he does such an amazing job. This book includes songs and poetry, and he sings the songs, and he just goes all out with the voices. So I think that this book is just great if you want to start into the fantasy genre, and it's definitely one of my favorites. And finally, the last classic that I want to mention is Frankenstein, which I read on my Kindle. I really also enjoyed it. I think that it just reinforces the fact that I really do like Gothic literature. It's a very obscure kind of story, and a very tragic one as well, and I talked about it, I believe, on my wrap-up, so I will link it below if you want to know more about it. But it's Frankenstein is actually the doctor that created the monster, not the monster itself. And the story starts in the Arctic, where an explorer is just on an adventure, and he's a very ambitious sort of man, and he finds Victor Frankenstein, and Victor Frankenstein is like, no, you should not be doing this, you should not be this ambitious, this is how I started, and look at my story. So basically Victor Frankenstein narrates his story with the monster to this young man, to this adventurer, and it's just great, and it's amazing, and it's such a sad story, honestly. There's nothing good that happens in it, but I think that I like the commentary on life and on ambition and just the power of man, and yeah, it's a great story. So that's it. So those are all of the books that I read, or all of the classics that I read last year. So let me know if you read any of these and your thoughts on it. And yeah, hopefully this video was pretty helpful for everyone, and thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys with the next video. Bye.